Hey friends, before we loosen the laces of time and step barefoot onto the cold flagstones of some very grim dining halls, do me a tiny favor. Tap the like button as softly as a monk turning a page, slide your finger over to subscribe if you're new, and drop a comment telling me the weirdest late-night snack you've ever craved. You know I read them all. Usually while brewing insomnia-strength tea at 2 a.m. Ready? Dim the lights, let the glow of your screen play candle flame in the dark, and settle back. Tonight, we're tasting history's most unsettling supper, the final meals that whispered farewell from condemned lips.
Imagine the corridor first. It smells of damp mortar and boiled starch, the scent of freshly laundered linen that will never be used twice. Torches hiss, iron sconces throw jumpy shadows like misbehaving puppets across the walls. You're escorted by two guards who don't meet your eye. They aren't cruel, they're simply thinking about their own breakfasts tomorrow, and you are thinking of nothing but tonight. A turnkey jingles keys as if rehearsing the last notes of a lullaby you never learned. But before the door shuts for good, the jailer leans close and asks the strangest, softest question you'll ever hear. What would you like to eat?
That moment, sharp as vinegar on the tongue, is where our story begins. Because final meals aren't just calories. They're confessions served on pewter plates, philosophies carved in meat, secret jokes baked into crusts. They tell us who a person believed they were, sometimes even who they wanted to haunt. And across centuries, gallows to guillotine, oubliette to electric chair, these menus have been as diverse as the crimes that booked the reservation. So scoot your chair closer to the plank table. Feel each splinter under your fingertips. I'm sliding 7 platters toward you, one per episode, starting with the medieval world's quietly theatrical approach to Last Suppers. The medieval scaffold was not subtle. Neither were its politics. You could end up there for treason, coin clipping, or merely owning the wrong pamphlet. Yet, on the eve of execution, English sheriffs often allowed jail delivery, a brief furlough in taste. Usually, the prisoner picked humble fare, white bread instead of bran, a half pint of ale instead of sour small beer. Why so plain? Partly because budgets were brutal. Jails funded these meals from parish alms, or, more cynically, from the very fines that condemned the inmate. But there's another layer. Medieval theology warned against gluttony right before meeting God. Overindulgence smelled of arrogance. You kept it modest to show you were suitably terrified. Still, rebels occasionally flexed. Take Jack Cade's lieutenant, John Moulton, captured after the 1450 Kentish uprising. On his final night, he demanded venison pie. Venison! Only nobles could legally hunt deer. By chewing that forbidden flesh in his cell, Moulton staged a last act of defiance, a mouthful of outlawed privilege to remind the sheriffs why they feared men like him. According to a friar's margin note, he devoured it greedily, laughing, yet tears fell like gravy. History doesn't record the cook, but I like to imagine some sympathetic kitchen maid slipping extra peppercorns into the crust, because pepper was pricey, and sedition loves spice. Across the channel, French prisoners danced between austerity and theater too. In 1314, Marguerite de Bourgogne, one of the infamous Tower of Nesle adulterous princesses, faced strangulation and burning. Her chosen meal? A single white fig.
Chronicles disagree whether she ate it or merely held it, pale fruit trembling in pale hands like a prophecy of the ash she'd soon become. One chronicler claims the fig symbolized fragile purity. Another insists it was a jab at Philip IV, who'd once called her frivolous as a fig. Either way, that tiny sphere rolled through decades of gossip, outliving every torch that charred her body.
Let's step farther east. In 14th century Prague, alchemists flirted with heresy whenever experiments failed to turn lead to gold. Master Dalibor the violinist, who supposedly soothed fellow inmates by playing through cell bars, asked for roasted goose stuffed with apples and marjoram. Goose fat, in Bohemian superstition, absorbed the soul's bitterness. The apples promised sweetness in purgatory. Marjoram eased coughs, and Dalibor had wept blood-tinged phlegm from days of torture. Legend says he shared bites through the bars, passing greasy morsels to pickpockets and petty forgers who die weeks later. A single bird feeding a choir of doomed throats. Tell me that isn't both heartbreaking and disturbingly communal. Beneath these menus lurks logistics. Medieval kitchens were limping operations. Fires crackled with peat or whatever scrap wood servants scrounged. The cook might resent this extra task. Why waste saffron on someone exiting payroll tomorrow? Yet etiquette manuals insisted the condemned be treated as pilgrims of the next world. Neglecting them invited haunting. Picture a scullion sprinkling salt over ill-kept beef, muttering a quick prayer. May his ghost know I seasoned generously. Salt wasn't just flavor, it was spiritual insurance. Now, let's wander to Italy, where Renaissance prisons, though technically post-medieval, still wore chainmail manners. Florentine banker Bernardo di Bandino Berencelli, one of the Pazzi conspirators who stabbed Giuliano de' Medici, was hanged in 1479 after 3 days in fetters. His final request? A platter of broad beans drizzled with olive oil and black pepper, plus a beaker of Vernaccia wine. Broad beans were funeral food since Roman times. They evoked Mercury guiding souls. Berencelli's choice signaled erudition, a last wink that he understood classical symbolism better than his executioners. Leonardo da Vinci sketched the hanging. I like to think he sniffed those beans cooling on the windowsill and tucked their aroma into the drawing's margins. You, listener, are beginning to smell the kitchens too, aren't you? Animal fats mingling with candle wax, sour wine in clay cups, sweat of guards leaning near hearths. Let that ambience seep into your hoodie. We have plenty more courses to savor, some grotesque, some strangely tender. But I won't ladle them all at once. Tonight, we've tasted only a spoonful of medieval customs. Next episode, we'll slide into early modern Europe, where powdered wigs met prison gruel and condemned witches insisted on rye cakes shaped like little moons. Slide a fresh log onto the fire, friend, and pull your blanket a little higher. It's time to kick open another kitchen door. The torches have guttered out in that damp medieval corridor we crept through last night, and dawn is already bruising the sky over a very different age. Powdered wigs are waiting on pegs. Chamber pots have been sloshed empty onto cobbles still slick with frost. Somewhere outside, the first newspaper hawker of the morning shrieks headlines about treason, witchcraft, and the price of sugar. But inside these chilly cells, the only headline that matters is whispered by the turnkey as he cracks the grate. What do you fancy for breakfast, madam? It will be your last.
You can smell the century shift. Gone is the heavy musk of peat smoke and tallow. Now there's the sharper tang of coal and the faint perfume of orange peel. Fashionable, imported, expensive. Europe has docked new worlds in her harbors and peppered her tables with spices that once cost a kingdom. Even death row menus have grown more flamboyant. Yet the rules of the game remain the same. Choose a meal that tells a story quicker than any confessor could tease from your lips. Let's start in London, 1660, in the bowels of Newgate Prison. The walls sweat lime, and the straw on the floor is so alive with vermin you'd swear it's breathing. Tonight's condemned man is Colonel Thomas Harrison, one of the regicides who signed Charles I's death warrant. The Restoration has called in its deaths, and tomorrow Harrison will be drawn, hanged, and quartered. Every syllable of that sentence meant to crack ribs before the rope even creaks. Offered any dish his wallet can fund, Harrison, Puritan to the marrow, declines everything but a single bowl of milk porridge. No meat, no ale, no sugar sprinkle. Porridge, pale as repentance. Was it piety or a final jab at royal finery? Some onlookers swear they saw him smile into the spoon, savoring the simplicity like a sermon. Others say he couldn't swallow more than 2 mouthfuls before he felt the phantom hook of tomorrow. Either way, that humble bowl became a footnote in Pepys's diary, floating there like a tiny white ghost. Cross the channel and the drama gets cinnamon-scented. Paris, 1673. Catherine de Chay, better known as La Voisin, has spent decades concocting poisons and black mass charms for France's elite. Now shackled in the Bastille, she's offered the traditional option of le dernier repas. She demands vol au vent, puff pastry stuffed with veal sweetbreads, mushrooms, and truffles, washed down with a goblet of vin d'orange steeped with bitter Seville peels. It is, in effect, the most expensive apology note a cook can write. Royal accountants balk at the receipt, but the lieutenant criminel nods. Sometimes letting a witch gorge on luxury is cheaper than letting her curse the wine. Witnesses later insist the flaky crust shattered like fragile secrets under her teeth. One guard claims he saw her slip a crumb into her bodice, perhaps to feed infernal spirits on the pyre. We'll never know. The flames rose high enough to turn speculation into ashes. Edge north to the Dutch Republic, and you'll meet Cornelis de Witt, Republican statesman and icon of naval glory, also newly accused of plotting William of Orange's downfall. In 1672, rotting inside the Hague's Gevangenpoort, Cornelis asks for a humble dinner: smoked eel, rye bread, and gin. Smoked eel is the workingman's feast, rich, oily, nothing a patrician normally flaunts. Yet that's the point. By selecting fish and bread, he stages a Protestant parable. I am no threat, merely a fisher of men. Sadly, the mob outside interprets differently. They drag Cornelis and his brother Johann into the street, tear them limb from limb, and reportedly nibble the eels left cooling on the windowsill. History is rude like that. Sometimes the last meal becomes the first course for someone else's riot. But not all condemned souls go quietly. Let me escort you to Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Bridget Bishop, first of the accused witches to hang, is offered a final dish.
American prisons haven't yet adopted elaborate customs, but the sheriff's wife, pitying her, delivers homemade rye cakes dotted with raisins. Rye, alas, is the grain that can harbor ergot fungus, suspected by some modern historians as a hallucinogenic culprit in the witch hysteria. Whether Bridget knew or not, she devours the cake slowly, licking syrup from her thumbs. The watching matron shivers, certain each swallow strengthens devilish powers. But to Bridget, it's just childhood comfort in a world that's lost its mind. By dusk, she's swinging from Gallows Hill, crumbs still sweet on her teeth. Pause for a sip of cocoa, listener. Feel how each plate we uncover is less about appetite than authorship. The condemned scrawl their final autobiography in grease stains and gravy trails. And sometimes they use it to settle scores. Consider Italy again, 1739. Passione, an Umbrian bandit known for robbing bishops, is captured near Perugia. For his last meal, he orders zuppa inglese, a trifle-like custard soaked in Alscherm's liqueur. Why? Because Alscherm's owes its vivid scarlet to cochineal insects crushed into dye, and Passione once bragged his dagger never left priests so rosy. The bowl arrives trembling like a heart in a rib cage. He eats in silence, red syrup dripping down his beard, making the symbolism grotesquely literal. Jump ahead to 1757 London. William Dodd, the macaroni parson, caught forging bonds to fuel extravagant taste. His final request? An entire pineapple. Exotic, absurdly expensive, a true Georgian status symbol. Pineapples rent for display at dinner parties. Few mortals actually eat them. Dodd slices each spiky ring with the same foppish elegance that ruined him, offering wedges to fellow inmates, even the jailer. It's a sermon on vanity, delivered not from a pulpit, but from a fruit plate. When his friends compile a posthumous pamphlet pleading clemency, they mention the pineapple, hoping the image of that fragrant generosity might soften public opinion. Spoiler? It doesn't. The rope is less sentimental than the populace. Yet the most poignant early modern menu I've found belongs to a woman whose name barely survives court ledgers, Anne Green, 1650, Oxfordshire servant accused, wrongly, of infanticide. Given salted beef and ale, she refuses food entirely, fasting 3 days, in hopes her executioners will see her frailty and spare her. They don't. But the twist? After hanging, her body revives on the dissecting table. Pulse returns, eyes flutter. Doctors, stunned, declare it divine intervention and free her. Her last meal is thus an intentional non-meal, a theological bargaining chip. When she later marries and opens a tavern, local folklore claims she always served salted beef gratis to pregnant women, insurance against the same nightmare. Now, as the coals in our modern fireplace gutter, picture the cooks behind these plates. They're anonymous ghosts, yet their ladles shaped destiny. A soft puree can soothe a choking throat enough to let a prisoner speak a final manifesto. A dry shank bone can splinter morale. In 1718, when the pirate Stede Bonnet awaited hanging in Charleston, the jail cook, once press-ganged by Bonnet at sea, deliberately undercooked his requested pork stew. Bonnet spent the night retching, too sick to compose any charismatic farewell. Petty revenge? Absolutely. And history lost the fiery last words that might have gilded his legend.
Next episode, we'll sail straight into the 19th century, where Victorian etiquette collides with penitentiary bureaucracy. You'll watch condemned gents debate between turtle soup and beefsteak, only for governors to veto budgets and swap turtle for turnip. We'll unpack how newspapers turned last meal lists into sensational copy, feeding readers morbid appetites along with breakfast kippers.
Curl close to the embers, listener, because the lamps of the long 19th century are sputtering awake, and the corridor between kitchen and gallows has grown even narrower. Steam rattles in iron kettles. The first posters of the penny press snap against brick walls, and somewhere in a dank service stairwell, a turnkey rehearses the polite cough he'll use to announce, "Breakfast, sir, by order of the Home Secretary."
The world outside these prison yards is suddenly louder. Railways shriek across the landscape. Telegraphs twitch like electric nerves. Clerks in stovepipe hats debate mesmerism and phrenology over custard. Yet ask any condemned soul in Newgate, Sing Sing, or the Conciergerie, and they'll swear nothing has changed since the Acts of the Middle Ages, except perhaps the menu and the mileage of gossip. Because now, every forkful you lift is reported in half a dozen newspapers before you swallow. Last meals have become theater, and the audience demands an encore.
A forkful of sympathy, if the budget allows. Begin in 1837 London, the year young Victoria first pulls on the crown. Inside Newgate, 18-year-old Sarah Durrant awaits execution for strangling her employer's toddler with a sock ribbon. The jail's new governor, keen on reforms, offers her anything within reason. Sarah asks for a single orange. The request seems saintly, until reporters learn that citrus prices have tripled after a late frost. Broadsheets howl at the extravagance, indicting fruit-importing philanthropy as if the peel were encrusted with rubies. Sarah peels it slowly anyway, each spiral curling like a confession onto the plank table. When the drop finally takes her, printers are already rolling out the headline, "The Orange Murderess Peels Her Destiny." The fruit costs twopence. The story sells 50,000 copies. Contrast that with 1845 Dublin, where the famine's shadow has begun to stretch. Patrick O'Grady, convicted of stealing a sack of flour at pistol point, is scheduled for the rope. The prison clerk reads him the regulation line, "You may order what victual you please within the bounds of Christian decency," and Patrick chooses a full Irish breakfast. Rashers, black pudding, soda bread, butter. The warden pales. Pork is rationed. But a nationalist newspaper offers to foot the bill, eager to paint Patrick as Robin Hood. Thus, a sizzling pan of bacon becomes political propaganda, and the aroma drifts through cell bars like treason. Outside, hungry crowds gather to sniff the wind and curse the Crown grain stores. Patrick's breakfast does more damage than his doomed pistol ever could. Etiquette on the gallows. Flip the map to Paris, 1857. The guillotine still works overtime, but now it has competition from the feuilleton, those serialized newspaper sensations devoured with morning coffee. Pierre-François Lacenaire, poet-thief-turned-celebrity murderer, is marched toward the blade after indulging in blanquette de veau, white veal stew. Chic ladies read his gastronomic choices in Le Petit Journal and swoon. Half of them cooked the same dish last Sunday. Critics accuse him of turning the death house into a supper club. Lacenaire merely pats his lips with a napkin and quotes Byron, "I lived and died a Greek." The guillotine falls, but not before printers seize on his recipe, publishing La Blanquette de l'Assassin, complete with wine pairing. Sales of veal surge for a fortnight. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Britain's Victorians wrestle with their own appetites and anxieties. The 1868 Capital Punishment Amendment has just moved executions behind prison walls. That means no more public spectacles, so the press doubles down on culinary minutiae to quell public curiosity. The last meal slips from private indulgence into a form of national pornography. Case in point, Frederick Baker, the notorious Alton child murderer, 1867. Newspapers debate not only his confession, but whether the cold mutton chop he ate the night before had been over-peppered. One columnist insists the pungency proves he harbored secret hope of reprieve. Too much pepper means a man intends to taste tomorrow. Another writer, moralizing, praises the simplicity. The sinner eschewed rich pudding, as if repulsed by the satiety of worldly excess. And somewhere in the margins, the prison cook shrugs. He'd run out of gravy. Pepper was all he could add. American portions. Republic of spectacle. Sail west, and you'll find the United States forging its own ritual. Bigger helpings, bigger headlines. 1873. Sing Sing Prison on the Hudson. William Foster, convicted of killing a dance hall bouncer, requests dozen fried oysters, porterhouse steak, mashed potatoes, celery, mince pie, and a quart of Santa Cruz rum. Warden Smith balks at the rum. Temperance crusaders are watching, but the rest arrives on a white linen cloth. Foster eats with alarming gusto, even buttering the celery. When asked why he ordered so much, he grins, because the reporters outside can't print the smell. They print the list instead, verbatim, and every saloon from Albany to St. Louis adds the Foster Special to its chalkboard in grisly tribute. Jump to Texas, 1888. The frontier has grown telegraph nerves, and wires hum with news of John Wesley Hardin, gunslinger extraordinaire. Before his sentence is commuted, for now, he sits in the Huntsville pen, offered a last meal which could be rescinded any minute. Hardin asks for 3 boiled eggs and a chaw of tobacco. The warden objects. Tobacco's not food. Hardin spits, then boil the chew and call it soup. Bureaucracy can't parse the sarcasm. They serve him eggs only. Hardin scowls, but devours them, yolk dribbling like sun on a desert horizon. When his lawyers wrangle a stay, Hardin quips to journalists, "See, 3 eggs buys more time than 10 commandments." Legend expands the tale until cowboys swear he forced the warden to eat the shells. Science and the sanitarium. As the century tilts toward its fin de siècle, medicine intrudes on the ritual. Doctors argue rich food may accelerate a peaceful demise, sparing the hangman from botched jobs. In 1896, Rhode Island, suspected serial poisoner Mary Ann Wilson requests lobster Newburg, a dish swimming in sherry and cream. The prison physician vetoes it, claiming crustaceans provoke nervous excitation. Mary Ann retorts that nothing will excite her nerves quite like the noose. She served oatmeal instead. The rope slips,
Execution takes 20 agonizing minutes. Reformers howl. Soon, several states quietly instruct wardens to honor requests unless blatantly impossible. Better indigestion than bad publicity. Side dishes of resistance. But some prisoners weaponize abstention rather than indulgence. In 1892, St. Petersburg, Russian nihilist Sofia Gurevich declines food for 7 days before her hanging, sipping only cold tea. Tsarist officials fear she'll die early and rob them of legal closure. They force broth down her throat through a pewter funnel. She gags, curses, calling it the soup of tyranny. When the scaffold finally claims her, onlookers note she appears almost luminous. Whether from starvation or defiance, no one can agree. Within weeks, student radicals across Europe adopt the Gurevich fast as protest ritual. Cafes in Zurich serve empty bowls labeled Soup Nicoliste, an edible emptiness that tastes like revolution. Enter the electric chair. Menus in the age of voltage. 1890. Auburn Prison, New York. William Kemmler becomes the first man to face the electric chair. Officials, anxious, ask his culinary preference. Kemmler answers, a plain onion. Some say he chose it because electricity once lit an onion bulb in a science show he'd attended. Macabre poetry in produce form. Others think he meant to spare cooks the trouble. The newspapers, of course, seize on symbolism. Onion tears for Kemmler. After the ghastly botched current, flames, smoke, the smell of burning hair, editors compare the stink to fried onions. From that day, wardens notice onions vanish from many condemned menus. Superstition spreads faster than current. Across the Atlantic, Britain eyes electricity but clings to rope. The last public fascination shifts to timing. Should the meal occur 12 hours before or immediately prior to dawn? 1896, at Pentonville, Charles Thomas Wooldridge, later memorialized by Oscar Wilde in The Ballad of Reading Gaol, devours a breakfast of broiled herrings and marmalade only 20 minutes before the trap swings. Wilde, in his poem, describes the doomed man walking, yet none knew the grief within. Biographers debate whether marmalade's citrus brightness inspired the poem's suddenly vivid imagery, a sticky residue of orange and metaphor. Press, privacy, and the price of a pork chop. By century's end, last meals are simultaneously fetishized and censored. Some governors release full menus to reporters, others classify them as private medical data. The tug of war itself becomes headline fodder. 1899 Chicago. The Inter-Ocean sues Joliet Prison for the right to print Adolph Lutgert's supper. He boiled his wife in a sausage vat, after all. The warden settles by distributing anonymous table d'hôte cards listing 3 entree options, never stating which the prisoner picked. Readers are furious. They crave the intimate gore of choice. That tension between spectacle and dignity will shape 20th century policy, but that is another candle we'll light later. A moment for the cooks. Let's spare a sigh for the nameless men and women in striped aprons. They stand at sputtering stoves before dawn, beating eggs beside gallows shadows. They jot grocery lists, knowing half the town wants the prisoner starved, the other half wants him fattened for slaughter. One Kentucky matron in 1882 collapses after seasoning the condemned's ham steak. Her heart gives out. The coroner records death by over-sympathy. The warden deducts the cost of the ham from the execution budget anyway. Others find dark humor.
In Melbourne, Australia, 1891, the cook bakes Thomas Johnson a pie shaped like a coffin lid, steam vent sliced where the face would be. Johnson laughs so hard he nearly chokes, then asks for seconds. The jest makes the Sydney Evening News, and bakers across the continent experiment with novelty pastry molds. Morbid confection becomes chic. Tuck yourself in. Tomorrow we plug into modernity. Hear that distant clang? It's the 20th century rattling its keys. Soon we'll enter an era of motion picture cameras, where last meals can be photographed before the plates are cleared, and where condemned voices might mutter final recipes into wax cylinders. We'll examine how Jim Crow laws affect menu equity, how prohibition muddles requests for whiskey, and how World War rations cheat even the noose of its luxuries. But that feast belongs to our next vigil. For now, bank the coals, breathe the faint echo of smoked eel and pineapple, and ponder your own palate. Would you choose austerity or opulence? A single orange or a platter big enough to ransom? Tell me in the comments if sleep hasn't already ferried you downriver. And if these tales help the pillow cradle your head, click subscribe so the bellman will wake me for our next midnight banquet. Slide a chair a little closer to the wireless friend, because the calendar has flipped to January 1901, and the gaslights of empire are flickering behind black creep bunting. Queen Victoria is dead, the old century is officially over, and every execution chamber from Sing Sing to Singapore is wondering what to serve the first condemned soul of the modern age. No drums, no fanfare, just a kitchen memo. Menus will henceforth be typed, carbon copied, and filed for bureaucratic posterity. Congratulations! Progress has arrived wearing an apron. And with it comes a whole new batch of questions. How do ration books, prohibition officers, nutritionists, radio hosts, and civil rights lawyers squeeze themselves onto the prisoner's tiny tray? Grab your coffee, black, 2 sugars, no joke, and let's find out. The Edwardian appetite, silver cutlery, and silent reporters. Start in 1903, London's Pentonville prison. The rope is still law, but photography now lurks like a cat in every corridor. Warders ban cameras, yet journalists bribe errant boys to sketch plates from memory. So when burglar turned killer John Cornish Jack Lee requests roast goose with red currant jelly, the press prints an illustration lush enough for a Harrods catalogue. Silver cover removed by a white-gloved hand. Goose shimmering like an oil-slick sunset. Readers forget the murder. They order goose for Sunday supper. The Home Office fumes. Executions are becoming food adverts. In response, 1,904 regulations limit final requests to plain wholesome fare. The very next prisoner, seamstress Kate Webster, demands oat porridge. Reporters bawl that the age of drama is over, until the coroner notes Kate sprinkled the oats with a stolen packet of crystallized violets. Newsboys shout, "Flowered porridge of death," all along Fleet Street. Turns out, a teaspoon of sweetness can still sugarcoat the gallows. Across the pond, electric dreams, and chicken a la king. America, meanwhile, is learning to hum with alternating current. By 1915, 3 states swing the chair instead of the trapdoor, and each commissions a dietitian to decide what won't hinder conduction. Grease, they claim, increases skin resistance. Best avoid fried food. Enter Warden George Kirchner of Ossining, who crafts the first electro-friendly menu: broiled chicken breast, dry toast, stewed apples. Prisoners sneer, calling it the austerity platter. But rap sheet legend Carl Panzram circumvents the rule in 1920 by requesting chicken a la king, white sauce on the side. Sauce arrives in a china jug. He drinks it like brandy. No grease on the skin, thanks. When 2,000 volts later arc through his frame, a deputy swears the room smells faintly of sherry and mushrooms, like a railway buffet turning midnight. Reporters go wild. Chicken a la king sales triple in New York diners. Prohibition, the dry glass, and bootleg custard. January 1920. The Volstead Act slams the bar door on America. Overnight, whiskey fades from last meal requests, officially anyway. But in Louisiana's Angola farm, the cook is also the bootlegger, and he perfects milk punch custard. Bourbon whipped into dessert so thick, the guards mistake fumes for vanilla. Condemned moonshiner Elijah Red Thibodeau downs 2 bowls, smiles, and quotes scripture. "I go to prepare a place for you." Rumor says the chaplain caught a whiff and left the chamber tipsy. By 1925, wardens are guarding kitchens as closely as cells. Yet, savvy prisoners exploit loopholes. In Ohio, forger Francis Marion asks for fruitcake soaked overnight in rum. The law bans liquor in liquid form, not pastry. The cake arrives soggy as a shipwreck and fragrant enough to stun canaries. Warden shrugs. Loophole stands. Newspapers dub it booze cake justice. Housewives nationwide mail fruitcakes to the governor in protest. He rewrites policies so fast the ink nearly sizzles through the page. Radio static and the birth of the goodbye broadcast. Now twist the dial to 1932. NBC's new true crime segment, Courthouse Echoes, wants live coverage from San Quentin. The warden refuses microphones inside, but agrees to a post-execution recap if announcers plug the prison's charity sewing drive. During the broadcast, host Lowell Thomas describes murderer Juanita Spinelli's last meal: celery hearts, deviled eggs, and a pint of black coffee. She declined dessert with a polite nod, as if boarding a Pullman car. Millions listening in farmhouse kitchens shiver at the domestic familiarity. Letters pour in. How crisp were the celery hearts? Was the coffee chicory blended? Thus, radio teaches the nation to taste punishment through the speaker grill. Technicians realize silence sells too. For kidnapper Albert Fish, 1936, reporters gather outside Sing Sing. Warden Laws hands them a single sentence on a memo. Fish ate his meal with relish, but would not say of what it consisted. The mystery births legends: raw liver, salted child's heart, communion wafers. None confirmed, yet every variant inflames tabloid sales. Sometimes withholding a menu is more lucrative than serving one. Depression-era budgets, when the state can't afford seconds. The Great Depression guts prison kitchens like a hooked fish. Georgia's Milledgeville facility slashes last meal budgets to 15 cents. Guards joke that electrocution might cost less than dessert.
Still, prisoner James Waldrop in 1930 requests 1 apple. The cook, perhaps embarrassed, sneaks him 2. Waldrop eats both, then scribbles a note. "Leave the chores on the gallows for the crows. Tell them peacemakers feed beggars better." The line appears in the Atlanta Constitution, sparking donation drives. Within a year, Georgia ups the allowance to 40 cents. Never underestimate the fiscal power of fruit. World War rations. Victory gardens behind bars. Come 1943, ration books reign, even for the condemned. Sugar coupons are gold, meat tokens mythical. At Folsom Prison, Japanese-American inmate Iva Toguri, falsely branded Tokyo Rose, though later pardoned, watches another prisoner request T-bone steak only to receive whiting fish cakes. They fit the ration chart. In England, German POWs tried for war crimes may select from Red Cross parcels but not British stores, causing surreal menus. Canned bratwurst, Swiss chocolate, Argentine corned beef. A London columnist dubs it the Axis smorgasbord. Britons surviving on powdered eggs fume that enemies dine better than allies. One plucky Brummie cook counters by growing herbs on the gallows roof, literally a victory garden in the shadow of death. When bomber pilot Bruno Dorner requests something that tastes of home, she picks sage, thyme, mint, dices them into rabbit stew, rabbit being off ration if caught wild. Dorner eats quietly, then says in shaky English, "Tell her it worked." The cook later confides she added far more mint than recipe called for. "I wanted it to bite." History forgets her name. The herb patch thrives for 2 more winters. Civil rights and the menu of equality. In the 1950s, American courts finally scrutinized racial disparities in death sentences and, by extension, the food. A 1955 NAACP study reveals black inmates in Mississippi receive, on average, 1/3 the monetary value of white inmates' last meals. Headlines roar. Mississippi's governor issues a brusque order. Henceforth, no inmate shall receive any meal exceeding 50 cents. Overnight, equality is achieved by lowering everyone's plate to a common gruel. Satirist Langston Hughes pens a column titled "Jim Crow's Cut-Rate Cuisine," marveling that segregation could end at the dinner table only by starving both sides. Elsewhere, change moves with more grace. California in 1956 allows the condemned to dine with 2 invited guests, chaplain, lawyer, or family. Rapist Carol Chessman, who'll fight his sentence for years, selects his mother for spaghetti and meatballs. Reporters expect tears. Instead, they get a spirited debate on punctuation. Mrs. Chessman is a former schoolteacher. She corrects her son's grammar between bites, asks for extra Parmesan, and tells the guard, "He always did run on with his sentences." The quip lands on front pages, reminding the nation that even felons were once scolded children. Public support for his clemency spikes. Television, Technicolor, and the instant rewind. By 1964, network cameras line prison gates like vultures. Warden Cecil Smith of Florida State Prison bans photographers, but not sketch artists, who now produce charcoal still lifes of last meal trays minutes after delivery. When serial killer Elmer Brandt orders sushi, rarity in 60s America, the warden charters a plane to Miami for fresh fish rather than appear uncultured on CBS. Newspapers publish the airfare cost. Taxpayers revolt.
A state senator proposes a native foods only bill, limiting meals to items grown or raised within Florida borders. The legislation dies quicker than Brandt's pulse, but the phrase local vor justice lingers in culinary circles. Color TV intensifies scrutiny. 1977, Utah revives firing squad for Gary Gilmore. He famously demands hamburger, hard-boiled eggs, coffee. Cameras can't enter, but ABC's live anchors dissect the choice like lit critics. Notice the simplicity. No fries. Perhaps an existential statement against consumer excess post-Vietnam. Viewers disagree, calling in to say fries would have been more American. An Idaho diner invents the Gilmore plate. Burger, 2 deviled eggs, black coffee, fries optional. The lawyer, the nutritionist, and the moratorium. Legal challenges to capital punishment culminate in 1972's Furman v. Georgia, halting executions nationwide. For 4 years, cooks stand down, stoves grow cold, and some states shutter death row kitchens entirely. Yet the mythology swells. Memoirs, movies, ballads, every artist imagines the meals that never were. When executions resume in 1976, budgets, intake forms, and liability waivers have tripled. Nutritionists now advise no shellfish if allergy unconfirmed, no alcohol for liability, caffeine limited to 2 cups. Bureaucracy has turned the last taste of freedom into a spreadsheet. Still, rebellion finds a fork. In 1981, Arkansas inmate James "Skip" Baldwin asks for dirt. The prison garden crew sterilizes a pint of potting soil in the autoclave, plates it like caviar. Baldwin sprinkles salt, takes one symbolic bite, declares, "Dust to dust." The rest he smears on his face like war paint. Appeals court calls it a sign of unfitness, stay denied. Poets declare it the bleakest meal of the century. Click, like, execute. Digital age dilemmas. By the late 1990s, the internet arrives, and with it, a new banquet of voyeurism. Texas posts every executed inmate's last meal online in Arial font, igniting forums where strangers rank choices like menu critics. Too many carbs. Respect for going vegan. Why no dessert? When the list includes one prisoner who declines food, keyboard philosophers debate nihilism for 20 pages. A year later, facing mockery over a 40-item request untouched by the prisoner, Texas abolishes last meal privilege entirely. Policy memo: meals shall not exceed regular unit portions. The public gasps, half from outrage, half from jealousy that tradition is gone before they can weigh in. Other states double down. Oregon publishes a photo gallery. Florida streams a live blog. Hashtags bloom. Hashtag final bite. Hashtag gallows gourmet. TikTok chefs recreate infamous plates, clinking forks to the chant, "We're all just one bad day away." The ritual that began as a pastoral courtesy has mutated into a global cooking challenge, where we set down the tray. We've marched a long road from Sarah Durant's Solitary Orange to HD snapshots of uneaten feasts. Along the way, we tasted goose under gaslight, chicken a la kill switch, fruitcake soaked in rebellion, and porridge laced with violets. We watched cooks garden on gallows roofs, radio hosts narrate celery, and bureaucrats convert mercy into policy code. Does the ritual comfort the condemned? Sometimes. Does it console society? Rarely.
Mostly it tells us, with each bite, how obsessed we are with the thin membrane between living and leaving. Food, after all, is the last grammar we share before silence. Crack your knuckles, scoot a little deeper into that blanket fort of pillows, and dim the phone screen down just enough that it feels like a single candle guttering against the dark. Because tonight, we step straight out of analog memory and into the pixel-sharp, always streaming carousel of the 21st century, where a condemned person's very last forkful can be screenshotted, debated, memed, demonetized, and forgotten again before the IV drip even starts to hum. No fanfare, no sepia tone, just the blue glow of LED status bars ticking down the minutes like a digital metronome. Welcome to the era of algorithmic appetite, where mercy meets metadata, and nothing, even a final meal, escapes the scroll. Here's the first truth of our brave new decade. The audience is bigger than the prison yard. When Ohio revived executions in 1999 after a 36-year hiatus, they also quietly updated the warden's job description to include public information liaison. Translation: every ingredient, weight, brand name, and approximate calorie count of a prisoner's last dinner needed to be logged for potential open records requests, because journalists now filed them via email at 11:59 p.m. and expected a PDF by sunrise. Paperclip, font choice, all discoverable. The kitchen clerk, once trusted only to balance salt and pepper, suddenly had to speak fluent FOI. At first, the system coughed like an old fax machine. One chef scrawled "hamburger patty" on a carbon slip. The records office demanded clarification. What cut? How lean? He'd tossed the butcher's box already, so he guessed 80-20. Week later, a tabloid headline sneered, "Killer gets prime-grade beef while schools serve mystery meat." The warden sighed, instituted mandatory photography of every plate beside its packaging, evidence if the optics went sour. That single policy spiked the food purchasing budget by 12%. Generic labels looked too shameful on camera, so administrators started springing for recognizable brands. It was PR spending disguised as ketchup. Cue the next complication: dietary ideology. By 2004, the US counted over 3 million practicing vegans, and one of them, rapist-murderer John Wayne Garrison, landed on Texas's Pulaski unit. He requested vegan pizza with cruelty-free cheese substitute. Texas, remember, had already nixed special last meals. But civil rights lawyers argued religious or ethical commitments must be honored under the First Amendment. Months of court filings later, the Fifth Circuit decided soy mozzarella did not pose an undue burden on the state. Problem: no supplier in Livingston carried it. So a lieutenant drove 80 miles to Whole Foods, receipts filed under Security Supply Fuel. Internet activists learned of the journey, calculating the gasoline's carbon footprint, tweeting #GreenLastMealMyFoot. Thus, a final dinner meant to embody compassion detonated a miniature culture war about vegan virtue and fossil fuels. One bite, 5 think pieces. If you're thinking, surely there's an app for that now, oh, you sweet summer pilgrim. In 2011, a pair of Stanford dropouts launched Final Bite, a crowdsourced database promising real-time updates from death row kitchens nationwide. They recruited volunteer court correspondents, mostly undergrads chasing adrenaline, who texted dish details from courthouse hallways to a central Slack, where moderators cross-checked with Department of Corrections press releases, then published push notifications. Arkansas, 7:43 p.m., lethal injection stays lifted, lasagna order reinstated. Users could tap a heart icon to send comfort or a broken heart to protest. Within 3 months, the app hit 500,000 downloads and a Wall Street Angel valuation of $10 million. Monetization came via banner ads from, you guessed it, meal kit services. Chef-crafted comfort delivered to your door. Skip the chair, keep the flavor. Sponsors pulled out after a satire site mocked the synergy, but by then the damage was done. Last meals had been gamified.
Meanwhile, the condemned themselves, who rarely got Twitter but always caught wind of it, began choosing menus with a wink toward viral potency. Take Carlton Hayes, 2014, Oklahoma. He asked for #fries. Guards looked baffled. He clarified, plain fries arranged in the shape of a pound symbol. They complied, the kitchen aide snapping a photo for documentation. Sure enough, when the picture leaked, snack brands retweeted it with eyes emoji captions. Across the globe, 1 million thumbs double-tapped a symbol formed of potatoes, forgetting there was a man attached to the plate. Hayes's stated hope, scribbled on a legal pad, had been to remind the world I was here. Mission, oddly, accomplished. Then came 2016's most whispered case, Maisie Kadir, the first transgender woman executed in modern U.S. history. She requested a feast reflective of every stage of her life: Pakistani biryani, her childhood; Mississippi catfish, her runaway years; kale Caesar, her wellness phase; and rainbow sherbet, her transition's first pride. The DOC balked at the multi-course logistical nightmare. Advocacy groups threatened civil action. A compromise emerged: a single rice bowl spiced with saffron and catfish bits, spinach replacing kale, sherbet on the side, colors melting into the biryani like watercolor promises. The photo leaked within minutes, but so did the kitchen's internal note describing the sherbet as rainbow for media optics. Comment sections split into trenches. Some hailed celebration of identity. Others shrieked about pandering with sprinkles. Maisie's final recorded words: "Let them taste contradictions." They did, and spat them back as algorithms. Here's another wrinkle: allergy liability. In 2019, Alabama nearly rescheduled an execution after discovering that the prisoner, Maurice Gaunt, claimed a severe peanut allergy, but had asked for Reese's peanut butter cups. Was he suicidal beyond the state's intent, or simply trolling? Lawyers argued he was exercising free will. Medical staff feared anaphylaxis would complicate the lethal injection's optics. Gant eventually swapped the candy for Snickers. No peanuts? Newsflash, it contains them. The warden, fearing headlines, stripped candy from the menu altogether. Gant died chocolateless, but the legal precedent lingers in HR training slides. When allergies conflict with autonomy, consult counsel before confection. By 2020, the pandemic slammed shut visitation rooms and, by extension, the centuries-old privilege of sharing last meals with clergy or kin. CDC guidelines barred outside food. Kitchen staff masked, gloved, sanitized every utensil thrice. Prisoner Stanley Mercer asked for a double cheeseburger from the prison canteen, but only if cooked by the volunteer chaplain who once flipped diner patties. Denied. Chaplain contact not essential. Mercer downgraded to peanut butter sandwich, ate alone behind plexiglass, died without a handshake. Social justice authors later wrote that COVID killed the last shred of communal ritual even faster than it killed bodies. When distance becomes policy, ceremony suffocates. All this time, our old companion, backlash, sharpened its knives.
In 2022, the Norwegian parliament debated whether offering elaborate last meals violated the spirit of their human rights-forward incarceration model. They haven't had capital punishment since 1948, but the debate roared anyway. Such is cultural import. A socialist MP argued that the ritual glorifies death like a culinary carnival. A conservative countered that food is the final dignity. The motion ended moot, yet it spawned a viral documentary series, Bored till Dommedag, Table for Doomsday, reenacting famous foreign Last Suppers in a minimalist Oslo restaurant. Reservations sold out before the first episode aired. Diners sampled saffron biryani while overhead screens displayed dossiers of the executed. Ethics critics howled. Ticket prices surged. Nothing sells like forbidden flavor.
Which brings us, hush now, to the newest mechanical wrinkle: 3D printed protein. In 2023, California's San Quentin partnered with a biotech startup eager for publicity. Their printer could extrude muscle-textured soy into any cut requested. Budget-friendly, cruelty-free, essentially unlimited. Murderer-turned-culinary blogger Daniel Cruz asked for filet mignon medium rare, plant-based. The warden rejoiced at the savings. Animal rights groups cheered. Beef lobbyists threatened lawsuits. But when the printer jammed mid-steak, staff served the half-formed slab anyway. Cruz laughed, called it postmodern, tweeted, via lawyer, a selfie with the glitch meat. The photo hit 12 million impressions, overshadowing his crimes entirely. Is a meal still last if it spawns infinity scrolls?
Pause your scrolling finger. Here in the low light of whatever hour you've stumbled upon these words, we finally have to ask, what's left of mercy when performance devours privacy? A custom cupcake can trigger a culture war, a missing side dish, a conspiracy theory. When every ceremonial bite is a data point, have we turned nourishment into nothing more than clickbait garnish? Or has the ritual simply evolved into the mirror we deserve, reflecting every fear, fad, and dietary sermon back at the society that invented them? That's a question too big for one late-night monologue. But it's exactly why I need your voice down in the comments. If the choice were yours under these fluorescent algorithms, would you opt for quiet comfort food no one can mock, or dial up the spectacle, etching your name in the cloud with sprinkles and irony?
Take a slow breath through your nose. Let the ceiling fan whir like distant Gregorian chant. And picture the prison kitchen at 3:17 a.m. Fluorescent lights buzzing, convection ovens ticking down, and a chaplain with one arm elbow deep in a 5-pound tub of kosher salt while flipping through a pocket lunar calendar with the other. Because the next execution on the docket is scheduled for sunrise tomorrow, and the condemned man Martin Marty de la Cruz has converted to Orthodox Judaism exactly 26 days before his death warrant comes due. Conversion behind bars is nothing new. Wardens keep pamphlets for more religions than the United Nations recognizes. But Marty is the first inmate here to declare that, according to Halakha, any food he consumes after civil dusk counts as melave malka, a farewell meal for the departing Sabbath queen, and must therefore avoid 45 specific kinds of muktzah labor, including lighting fire, kneading dough, and carrying goods more than 6 feet. The state, which set execution protocols decades ago when menu options rarely stretched past steak or chops, suddenly finds itself managing a wholly domestic ritual for a man they will inject with midazolam 4 hours later.
The chaplain's salt-caked elbow is Exhibit A in how sacred calendars crash into secular timetables. He is hunting for challah that was baked before sundown because reheating counts as bishul akum, forbidden cooking by a non-Jew, unless the bread was fully finished the day before. The kitchen's loaf, sadly, came out of the oven at 7:03 p.m., 13 minutes after sunset. So now the chaplain is improvising a loophole. Dehydrated matzo warmed by passive steam, which doesn't technically cook.
Meanwhile, the warden, sleep-deprived and juggling 3 legal pads, confirms with the Attorney General's office that delaying the lethal injection cocktail until half an hour after the Sabbath technically ends, 8:41 p.m., will not violate the statutory midnight to midnight window prescribed by state law. In normal human land, this would be farce. In capital punishment land, it is just Wednesday. And if you're wondering, doesn't the law override religious ritual in the last hours? Not according to decades of case law. In 2005, the Supreme Court reminded the world via Cutter v. Wilkinson that the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, RLUIPA, requires prisons to accommodate sincerely held beliefs unless they pose a compelling security threat. So unless Marty demands candles made of gunpowder or silverware forged into keys, the kitchen must pivot. This is how a maximum security facility morphs overnight into a multi-faith catering service. We've seen it all decade. Ramadan fasts requiring suhoor boxes handed through food slots at 3:50 a.m. Hindu prisoners requesting ghee blessed by a visiting Swami. A Buddhist inmate who insisted on chanting the Heart Sutra over his bowl of rice for exactly 21 minutes while a guard timed him like an SAT proctor. Each scenario forces staff to balance constitutional deference with logistical triage. Because, as one corrections officer jokes, around here, the 10 commandments come second to the 10-minute meal break. The calendar collisions. To grasp how chaotic it gets, stitch together 3 different sacred schedules across the last 15 years of executions. Lent. Catholic inmates must abstain from meat on Fridays, an issue if the lethal day lands on Good Friday. In 2012, Louisiana swapped a prisoner's barbecue ribs for catfish just hours before go time. Photos leaked, and critics blasted the fish fry as a carnival. The next Easter season, wardens quietly pushed scheduled deaths to Tuesdays to dodge the menu landmine. Passover. Leavened bread is verboten, but commissary matzah often arrives vacuum stale. Texas solved this by granting Passover requests only if placed 4 weeks in advance. In practice, most condemned men don't think that far ahead, leading to a surreal scenario in 2017 where an observant Jew ate a plain baked potato, skin counted as his bread of affliction. Twitter called it the carb compromise. Ramadan, sunset dictates iftar, yet most U.S. executions happen after 6 p.m. to cluster media briefings. So a fasting inmate gets 0 daytime calories on his final day, and only the last meal after dark, sometimes mere minutes before the gurney straps tighten. Civil rights advocates filed suit in 2018, alleging cruel nutritional deprivation. Courts ruled the state could simply offer breakfast at 4 a.m. Fasting prisoners declined, faith over facility. See the pattern? The holy clock ticks independent of civil paperwork, but the prison is caught in between. Someone still has to microwave the fish sticks, copy the side dish log, and hand-sign chain of custody forms. 3 signatures if the sauce is dairy, 4 if it's not. Enter the chaplain chef. Most prisons now designate at least one chaplain culinary cleared, a role requiring safe serve certification, allergen handling, and baseline knowledge of kashrut, halal slaughter, Jain vegetarianism, and Seventh-day Adventist health codes. The warden calls it interfaith mise en place. They keep a binder thicker than a death row Bible, pages color-coded by doctrine, time of year, and molecule of concern. Orange, pork derivatives, Islam, Judaism, certain Buddhist sects. Green, onion and garlic restrictions, some Jain and Shaivist Hindus. Blue, animal rennet controversy, vegan. Cross-reference that with statewide procurement contracts, and the chaplain might discover the only kosher-certified cheese slices permissible for a pizza are shipped from New Jersey and arrive frozen in 24-pound slabs. Cue dry ice, overtime, and a borrowing request to the women's facility 2 counties over. But the chaplain is no mere caterer. He or she must also watch for inmates using belief as protest. After South Carolina reinstated the firing squad option in 2021, one condemned man abruptly declared himself Wiccan, demanding a midnight ritual circle on the exercise yard with candles and salt. The chaplain suspected a delaying tactic. Candles contravene fire codes. They negotiated a salt outline drawn with a ketchup packet instead. The ritual happened, the firing squad proceeded. A law review article later pondered whether ketchup counts as sacred sacrament if the faithful wills it so. Spiritual nutrition labels. Another 21st century twist. Digital transparency means every meal doubles as teachable infographic fodder. After Georgia granted Baptist minister Kelly Gisandiner her favorite 2 pints of strawberry ice cream in 2015, anti-death penalty activists created Calorie of Compassion posters comparing her dessert's sugar load to the gall offered to Christ on the cross. The state responded by requiring nutritional labels in their press packets, inadvertently sparking a cottage industry of TikTok dietitians rating macronutrients of the macabre. One viral duet featured a wellness influencer exclaiming, "That's 86 grams of fat, girl, live your truth." 12 million views, 0 policy change. Secular skepticism. Now let's pan to the skeptics, those who argue the entire last meal ritual should be scrapped as empty theater. In 2025, California nearly passed Assembly Bill 2231, which would replace custom meals with a standardized reflection tray, plain rice, steamed veggies, and water. The idea being that equality in death demands sameness in sustenance. Human rights NGOs opposed it, claiming the state sought to erase a last vestige of personhood to streamline optics. The bill stalled, but the reflection tray prototype already exists in a warehouse fridge in Sacramento, shrink-wrapped like a museum relic from a future that never arrived. The staff's quiet rebellion. Guards, cooks, and nurses witness the absurd ballet, and some stage subtle rebellions. One Arkansas corrections officer, himself a former line cook, sneaks a pinch of smoked paprika rub onto every condemned man's steak, no matter the request. His clandestine signature of humanity. Another guard in Florida arranges fries into smiley faces before the mandated photo, a protest against the sterile gaze of the paperwork. They've never been reprimanded. People higher up suspect, but plausible deniability tastes like salt and grease. And sometimes mercy slips through official seams. In 2027, Louisiana scheduled 2 executions a week apart. Cellmates Jerome Watts, who loved sweet tea, and Michael Mick Harlow, a recovering alcoholic turned coffee fanatic. Kitchen policy forbade caffeinated beverages after 4 p.m. for medical monitoring. But the night shift nurse, hearing Mick's whispered wish for one last jolt, brewed a covert cup at 11:53 p.m., tucked it in a styrofoam mug, and labeled it routine specimen. Security footage caught nothing but a nurse's silhouette sharing silent sips with the condemned behind half-shut blinds. The nurse later called it palliative caffeine. He was suspended 3 days. The union quietly paid his rent. Some gestures, like smoke signals, still rise above policy.
Audience participation time.
So, midnight listener, if you were the chaplain chef handed tomorrow's holy paradox, how would you choose? Honor the letter of doctrine, even when the believer discovered faith last Tuesday? Or strip the ritual away to expose the execution's bare mechanics? Toss your verdict into the comments cauldron. Be civil, cite your sources, maybe even share Grandma's secret Passover brownie recipe. Slide your phone face down, feel the blue light fade, and picture the metal gate outside Archive Room B clicking open at 1:02 a.m. The air inside is colder than the walk-in freezer, perfumed with cardboard, toner, and warm plastic from a dozen climate-controlled servers churning all night. Stacked on rolling wire racks are the unloved artifacts of a penal bureaucracy. Hundreds of manila folders stamped "executed." But what grabs every midnight tour guest first are the Polaroids. A sea of 8x10 glossy photographs, each one a last meal. There's a styrofoam clamshell leaking peach syrup onto plywood, a T-bone glistening under fluorescent glare, a single hollowed coconut with a bendy straw and 2 maraschino cherries. The state photographer stands on a ladder for consistency. The plate is always centered, shot straight down, no shadows, no hands. Even the condensation rings must be visible because the file doubles as evidence that kitchen staff fulfilled the condemned's lawful request. Lawyers might argue later, the photo never lies. Until a decade ago, these snapshots moldered in off-site warehouses, but cost-saving digitization hit the Department of Corrections like a flood. Contractors scanned every image, appended calorie counts from nutrition software, and converted handwritten inventories into searchable metadata pinging across the cloud. What began as chain of custody procedure metastasized into what sociologist Amelia Knorr calls the memory economy of death. A market where final meal data is endlessly copied, curated, and, yes, monetized. Tonight, we explore how that economy feeds on our attention, how it reshapes public memory, and why chantry monks who once prayed for dead nobles might recognize something hauntingly familiar in TikTok cooks recreating a killer's nacho platter for clicks. Ready? Pull on the white gloves. Nothing in here belongs to the living. From filing cabinet to feed. The moment the first bulk dataset hit an open records portal, culture pounced. Food bloggers parsed flavor trends. Midwestern murderers favor fried bologna. Data journalists built heat maps showing regional soda preferences. Ethicists published think pieces titled, "Is a Google Sheet the New Book of the Dead?" BuzzFeed distilled it into listicles, 10 inmates whose last desserts will ruin cheesecake forever. And engagement soared. But the real inflection point came when Taste of Twilight, a boutique media startup, launched a podcast that paired each meal with a chef, a priest, and a victim advocate in roundtable dialogue. Ratings exploded. Within months, Netflix optioned the concept. Streaming budgets turned those 8x10 Polaroids into 8-episode docuseries. The archive room sprouted tripod marks on the floor.
Lighting techs clipped gels to ceiling fluorescence for ambient melancholy. Somewhere between episode pitches and popcorn sales, the archive ceased being a record and became a genre. Archivists felt the shift in their inboxes. Daily requests from culinary schools for high-resolution JPEGs, from graduate students studying carceral gastronomy, from NFT entrepreneurs wanting to mint unique blockchain tokens of the photos, complete with death warrants etched into animated GIF frames. One pitched slogan, "Own a slice of history before it's gone." The warden quietly deleted the email, but we all know screenshots are immortal.
The ethics of edible reliquaries. If medieval Europe commodified salvation through chantry endowments, masses sung in perpetuity for a patron's soul, our era monetizes damnation. A condemned man's strawberry milkshake might bankroll ad revenue. His burger becomes a canvas for influencer commentary. Critics call it cannibalizing tragedy. Defenders argue visibility fuels reform. Both invoke the phrase dignity of the dead, though nobody agrees what that dignity tastes like. Take the case of #BurgerForBilly. When Billy Jarrett requested 2 double-doubles animal style before Oklahoma executed him in 2026, fans of the West Coast burger chain launched a viral challenge. Buy Billy's order, post a selfie in silent protest, tag 3 friends. 500,000 burgers sold in 5 days. In-N-Out donated profits to victims' funds, death penalty watchdogs, and, ironically, the state prison chaplaincy. Critics blasted viral grief-washing. Supporters claimed moral judo, turning a ritual of death into charity. Billy, whose guilt was almost certainly real, became a hashtag, ergo a debate, ergo a commodity. Sound medieval? Remember that chantry priests once chanted masses in exchange for land endowments. The richer the patron, the more voices intoning Latin through candle-lit choirs. Salvation scaled with silver. Today, compassion scales with clicks. Data brokers and digital resurrection. Behind every trending hashtag lurks a broker. Third-party public records solutions aggregate final meal metadata, name, crime, date, menu, then sell API access to app developers hungry for macabre trivia. A startup called Memento Byte offers push notifications. On this day, 2001, James Bird ate peach cobbler. Tap to read more. See ads, maybe purchase bird-inspired cobbler mix shipped to your door. The state receives no profit cut. Next of kin receive nothing. Lawsuits have begun, citing privacy rights of deceased individuals. Courts wrestle with the concept of posthumous publicity rights. Is a last meal akin to a diary, a medical record, or a public document because tax dollars bought the fries? As one judge mused, the Constitution names neither ketchup nor cookies. While attorneys argue, machine learning models churn. Developers train GPT clones on last meal transcripts to generate authentic prison narratives for interactive fiction. One VR game, Final Plate, lets players role-play condemned inmates, choosing menus, writing apologies, even rehearsing their final statements. Critics call it trauma tourism, fans call it empathy tech. Either way, the archive's ghost gets a voice it never possessed at 35mm shutter speed. Opposite reaction, the purge movement. Just as medieval iconoclasts smashed church reliquaries, a digital iconoclasm gains momentum, the purge movement. Activists argue that cataloging last meals prolongs state violence. Each click re-executes the prisoner in miniature. They lobby for right-to-be-forgotten policies. In 2028, Illinois passed the first Food Privacy Act. After 10 years, last meal records must be scrubbed from public servers, retained only on encrypted drives accessible by court order.
Archivists balk. Historians warn of memory gaps. Victims' families fear erasure of accountability. Yet the purge clock ticks. Countdown banners flicker on advocacy websites like doomsday timers for data. The first deletion wave is set for midnight, New Year's Eve, less than 11 months away. Whether servers will comply or merely geofence remains to be seen.
Meanwhile, black market spreadsheets circulate on torrent sites, as forbidden archives always do. Once knowledge escapes, it wears mirrors and masks. The people making money on silence. The newest cottage industry isn't selling last meal images, it's selling removal services. A company called SanctiScrub charges ex-inmates and relatives to hunt down digital traces, scraping, DMCA flagging, pushing buried records into algorithmic oblivion. For $2,499, they promise near total hush. They market to everyone from petty parolees to families of executed celebrities. Their website banner shows a dove flying out of a shredded newspaper. Tagline, "Let your story be more than a headline." Chantry priests might recognize the business model. Pay us, and we'll recite the digital equivalent of masses until your loved one's sins fade from earthly ledgers. Medieval indulgence for an algorithmic purgatory. Different choir, same coin. Staff. Again. Back in Archive Room B, the overnight custodian wheels in a mop bucket. He isn't part of any grand narrative, he just worries about humidity levels and roaches attracted by syrup residue on the Polaroid's edges. Yet he's the final human gatekeeper between memory and mildew. He once confessed to the chaplain that he says a quick prayer, non-denominational, just a breath, every time he tosses a ruined print into the shredder. "Someone's mom cooked that boy burgers once," he mutters. The chaplain nodded, understanding better than any algorithm what crumb of dignity might cling to a crinkled photo. That same chaplain now campaigns for a middle path. Keep the records, but watermark images with anonymous codes, no names, no dates, transforming them into universal parables rather than clickbait collectibles. He pitched the idea at a criminal justice symposium. Let the meals speak, but let the world supply its own mirror. Lawyers shrugged, but a museum curator approached him later. Plans for an installation titled Sacrament and Sentence are underway, pairing nameless meal photos with stained glass panels echoing medieval chantry windows. History folding back on itself like dough. Where do we, the viewers, stand? We binge docuseries, debate in comment threads, maybe even cook along. Does that make us co-archivists or spectators of ritualized sorrow? The answer may hinge on what we do next, on whether we use these images as springboards to policy or pillows for late-night voyeurism. So pause, breathe, and glance at your own fridge. Is there a forgotten takeaway box, edges curling, waiting for morning disposal? Someone, centuries from now, might deem that artifact evidence of our era's rituals. The microwave beep, the personal screen, the solitary snack at 2 a.m.? A final meal is only final because a record says so. Remove the record, and every supper might be somebody's last. Last call. If you've traveled with me from salt-crusted chaplains to data broker marketplaces, from medieval chantries to modern purge campaigns, you felt how rituals of death refuse to sit still. They morph, monetize, and migrate across the mesh of servers humming beneath our feet. Perhaps tonight's takeaway is simple. Every sacred gesture, be it mass, matzo, or milkshake, gathers economic moss the instant it rolls into public sight. Hit the like button if you learned something, subscribe if you crave more midnight histories, and share your own thoughts below. Should the archive be locked, deleted, or displayed? Would you watermark dignity or open source the sorrow? I read every comment between candlelit edits and late-night tea, and your curiosity fuels the next dive. Until the next story, let the fan drone like distant plane song. Let your screens dim, and grant yourself the quiet permission to wander the archives of sleep. Good night, fellow travelers.